We have been assembling a 1981 ATC 110 Honda. At this point we have the bottom end completed except for the starter. So now we'll start assembling the top end. And we'll start with the piston and the cylinder. Next we'll do the cylinder head. And the camshaft and the ignition parts that go in the head. Now we're ready to install the rings. And before we do that, it's a good idea to check the end gap. That's the gap between these two ends of the ring. And to do that, you insert it in the cylinder, and then you'll push it down about 3/4 of an inch with the piston, so it's in there square. And you use a feeler gauge to check the end gap. And on these compression rings, it should be between 0.10 and 0.25 millimeters. Okay, these two are the compression rings. And then you have the oil ring, and these side rails are also checked. This gap is different. This one is between 0.3 and 0.9 millimeters. Alright, we start off by installing the oil rings. That's these three rings here. And this is the separator ring. We want to make sure that it's on there and it's just butted up. It's not overlapped this way or this way. Then you'll notice on the inside of the oil ring there's a little ledge. Okay, goes around the inside and also on the other side. And these side rails, they ride up on the edge. On the ledge, on both sides. So I'm going to go ahead and install these rings. And I'll show you what it's supposed to look like when it's installed. Alright, the oil ring is on now, and you'll see it kind of floats around, and you can squeeze it in. So that's on right. If you can't squeeze it in, you'll never get it in the cylinder. Alright, now we're going to put the other two rings on. These two are the compression rings, and they have to go in a certain order because they're not the same. So you can't flip them over. This goes on the top, and this one will go on the bottom. And also there's an upside and a downside on them. So if you look really closely, maybe you need a magnifying glass, you'll see a manufacturer's mark on the top of them, by the gap. This one says top, but usually they have a manufacturer's mark. So you want to get them in the right order and have the top side up on them. And be real careful. They're brittle. It's easy to break them. Okay, the rings are on now. The next thing you want to do is you want to stagger the end gaps. If the end gaps were all lined up, there'd be a straight shot for blow-by. So, for example, if the top ring's at 10 o'clock, you make the second ring, the compression ring, at 2 o'clock, and then the oil ring at 6 o'clock. Then the oil ring, since it's made up of 3 parts, you would stagger those 3 parts a little bit. And after you do that, we're ready to install the piston. You'll notice that there's some cutouts for the valves. One is bigger than the other, this the larger one. That's for the intake, so that will be going up on the engine towards the carburetor. And we're ready to put the wrist pin in now. And okay, here's the wrist pin, and here's a circlip. There's actually 2 of them, but the other one's in the piston already. I never took it out. And see the little cutout in the bottom of the piston, bottom of this hole for the circlip. Well, you don't want the gap in the circlip to be lined up on that. If you do, you'll never get it out. So you want to line it up maybe with the side of the circlip right there. Oh yeah, these are easy to drop. So it'd be a good idea to put a shop rag or a paper towel over your the hole in your engine so you don't drop any parts inside. You don't want to be taking it all apart again. Okay, so now we're ready to put the piston onto the engine. The piston is on now, so now we're ready to install the cylinder. And you'll notice on the cylinder there's 2 alignment dowels on the bottom, and there's 2 on the top. One on the top is taller than the other and has a little groove around the cylinder. Okay. That one we'll put this gasket on. It kind of looks like an O-ring, but it's tall. Actually, oil goes through here to oil the top part of the cylinder, top part of the heads. And we'll put this base gasket on, and it only goes one way. And we'll also put this gasket on the case, and it also only goes one way. All right, the gaskets are on now, and so now we're ready to install the cylinder. And you notice on the bottom, the inside is tapered a little bit, which helps get the rings in there, because we're going to have to collapse the rings by squeezing them in and getting them in. It's a good idea to put a lot of oil in here too to make it a little smoother. Okay, the cylinder's on now, so now we can put this cam roller on, and it'll go either way. Put that under the chain, and there's a bolt here, and where the end is smooth, and there's an aluminum washer. And they go into the side of the cylinder there to secure it. Now we're going to install the valves in the head. We'll start here with the exhaust valve. Push it through. This little washer here is an oil seal, and it's only on the exhaust side. For some reason the intake valve doesn't have one. So you put it on, the big side will go on first, and leave the little side sticking up. Put that on the end of the valve stem. Okay, then we'll put this cap over it. And the cap, I don't know if you can see inside there, but the cap, we'll push the cap down all the way, and part of that valve seal will stick out through it. Next, these two springs, the little one, and then the big one goes on the outside, and then this cap goes on, the small side goes down, and these two keepers will go on next. You need a valve spring compressor to put the keepers on. Okay, the valves are installed now. Next we're going to install the rocker arms, and they consist of 4 pieces: the actual rocker arm itself, and this is the adjustment screw. The square end goes on the top, and the flat end goes against your valve, and the lock nut, and the rocker arm shaft. Okay, here's what it looks like with these 3 pieces together. The valves and rocker arms are on, so now let's move on. And I forgot to mention earlier, but it would have been a good time to dig out the old exhaust washer and clean it out real good. That way the new one will fit in. We're not going to install it right now. We'll install it when we put the muffler on, the exhaust pipe. Okay, we can put the cam sprocket on now, and I'm going to point out now that the timing mark, one of the timing marks located, I don't know if the camera will pick it up or not, but it's between the screw hole and this sprocket tooth here. There's a little O, and there's a mark there, and there's another mark inside the head. See that line there at the top? The one right there? Okay, we'll be referring to these later on. So right now we'll just put the cam sprocket on this chain, because we won't be able to get it in later. We have to put it in before we put the head on. Alright, this gasket will go on the cylinder. It'll only fit one way. And the head gasket goes on the head, of course. And it'll only go one way. Then we'll slide the head over these four bolts here. Okay, the cylinder head is on. Next goes the gasket and the valve cover, and then we have 4 washers and 4 nuts. And you notice one of the nuts is different. It's rounded. And also, after you clean them off, you notice that one of the washers is actually copper. Okay, the copper washer will go down on this lower right hand stud, and as well as the rounded nut. Okay, I think they use copper because it's a little softer metal, and this is the one that oil comes through, so it'll be an oil seal. The cylinder head and the valve cover are installed now. So the next step is to put the camshaft in, and we'll set the valve timing. Okay. To start off, you want your piston to be at top dead center, and there's an F and T mark in here, and next to the F and T there's a little line. Now that's the actual timing mark, and we're going to use the T. That's for top dead center. So you'll set the piston to the top dead center, which is already done here. You can verify if you want to by taking a screwdriver and put it in the spark plug hole, and you'll turn it around. The screwdriver will touch the top of the piston, and you'll feel when you're at top dead center. There won't be any question about it. Now, if you have an older points engine, your magneto will look different, and you have to take the starter cage off. So it's on here. Take the starter cage off in order to see the F and T mark. Okay, so there's the T. And there's a little line next to it. That's the actual timing mark. And it'll be oriented like this. And one of these coils has a metal plate on it with a little line on it. So that's what you line it up with. Okay. And then we're going to put the camshaft in. Take the screw off. I put it here for safekeeping. Okay, when you put it in, you want to have the lobes pointing down towards the magneto. And you notice there's a little pin in here. You could have taken that off, but it's not really necessary because it'll clear when you put this cover on. It'll just clear, so it won't really damage anything. All right, so we're going to put the camshaft in and check our timing. If you want, you can reach through the back and guide the other end of the camshaft in with your finger. Okay, now we're going to look for that little O next to the between the screw and between the screw hole and the sprocket tooth, and that O should be lined up to the little notch inside this hole here in the top of the head. And if they're lined up, then your valve timing is set right. If they're not, you're going to have to advance the cam chain one way or the other in order to get everything lined up. You want to have the T mark set down here, and there's a pointer here pointing to the T. Then you want to have the little O on the cam sprocket lined up with a little slot up here. All right, once you get your timing set, you can put these 2 bolts in, and they'll go into the camshaft, and they'll screw it onto the sprocket. Okay, you put these 2 on, you'll torque these down, and also this cam roller bolt and the valve cover bolts and nuts. You'll torque those down to the factory specs. I don't have them on the top of my head, but you can check with your manual. Next, we're going to set the valve clearance. And it's set to 0.07 of a millimeter or 0.003 of an inch. And that's pretty thin. It's like a couple sheets of paper. And I found an easy way to do this is to tighten this adjusting screw down until it just touches, and then back it off about a quarter of a turn, and you'll be pretty close. You can start checking it at that point. And once you get it on, you tighten up the lock nut with a 9mm wrench, and then recheck it, because sometimes when you tighten it up, it'll readjust it. Okay, and you do the same thing on the other side, to the exhaust side, and that'll adjust your valves. Okay, the valves are timed and adjusted, so now we can put these covers on, and there's some new O-rings that came in the package. Might as well put new O-rings on them too. And also we can put this plate on the back, on the other side of the head there. We won't need access to that part anymore, and there's a gasket that goes with it. Alright, next we'll put this gasket on here, and we'll put this piece on. Let's slide it over. Okay, and that cover is secured by 3 of these shiny screws here with a real thin aluminum washers on it. Now it's time to put the spark advance on, and you'll see on the back of the spark advance there's a little slot in it, and it'll go over this pin on the camshaft. If you have a points engine and you just have one piece, it looks a little bit different than this. But it'll slide over there and it'll be on. Okay. Now if you have a CDI engine, you have to put this rotor on the spark advance. And to do that, you'll put the weights out a little bit and you slide it on. Okay. And you want the magnetic part of the rotor to be pointing to the right. There's a little line here, and you can see it's magnetic. It'll point to the right, and the slot will be pointing to the left. It'll go on the other way, but then you'll be 180 off. So you open the weights and you slide it down. It'll fit down in there. Okay, when you have it locked in, it'll be in tight like that. So go ahead and put it on, and you'll see that the magnetic part is facing to the right. Next, we'll put this base on. It'll be a points base if you have a points engine, or on this one, it's the coil or the pickup coil for the CDI engine. That'll go under these 2 screws here with the washers on them. If you have a points engine, here's where you're going to set the ignition. You set the point gap first, and then you set the timing. And I have another video that goes into a lot of detail on doing the ignition timing, but I'll just tell you briefly what you do is you set the timing so that when the F mark comes around, the ignition points will just begin to open. Okay, on the CDI engine, there really isn't a point gap. There are no points. But there is an air gap in here. It was set by the factory, and you shouldn't really ever have to change it. But if for some reason you took this coil off or got out of adjustment somehow, you can adjust them. There's a slotted screw here, and to adjust them, you need to use a non-ferrous set of feeler gauges because the regular ones will stick to this magnet. So here's a set of brass ones that you can get, and it's set for it's called a pulse generator air gap. It's set between 3/10 and 4/10 of a millimeter. As far as the timing, that's set with a timing light. So all we can do at this point is just approximate it to get it close enough to where the engine will start up. And to do that, you'll set the rotor, this line on the rotor, and you line it up with this line here. And the engine should start. If not, you can move it back and forth a little bit, and then we'll tune it up with a timing light. Well, that's about it. We put a gasket on. Oh, forgot to put this bolt on. So put this bolt to hold the rotor on next. Then we'll put a gasket on, put this cover on. There's 2 screws to secure that. And there's a screw here, goes on the side of the block for this wiring harness. The wiring harness slips in here. And that'll be the engine except for the starter. Okay, it's all buttoned up now. This video is getting pretty long, so I'll do the starter in the next video.